So it's highly likely she died in that apartment.
They've taken her, they've taken her. Those panic-stricken words echoed through a Portuguese resort on May 3, 2007, as Kate McCann ran from apartment 5A back to the tapas restaurant where her friends sat dining. Her 3-year-old daughter's bed was empty. The window was ajar. And in that moment, one of the most controversial missing child cases in modern history began. Tonight, we're diving into the case that shattered a family, divided public opinion, and spawned conspiracy theories that persist to this day. This isn't just another retelling of the Madeleine McCann disappearance. This is an unflinching look at the evidence, the contradictions, and the shocking truths that powerful forces have worked tirelessly to keep hidden from public view. Within hours of Madeleine's disappearance, a media frenzy unlike anything seen before descended on the small coastal town of Praia da Luz. The face of a blonde, blue-eyed British girl became instantly recognizable across the globe. Her parents, both medical doctors, were thrust into an international spotlight that would reveal both overwhelming support and devastating scrutiny. But beneath the headlines and heartbreak lies a labyrinth of inconsistencies, forensic mysteries, and eyewitness accounts that don't align with the dominant narrative. For years, these discrepancies have been systematically downplayed, dismissed, and in some cases deliberately buried. Journalist Sonia Poulton has spent years investigating what she calls the McCann machine, a powerful network of PR experts, politicians, and media figures who shaped public perception of the case. Her controversial documentaries suggest that critical evidence was swept aside to protect reputations, careers, and a version of events that might be more palatable than the truth. From unexplained DNA evidence to cadaver dog alerts, from contradictory witness statements to millions in investigation funding, tonight we examine what was found and why certain discoveries never made headlines. We'll analyze how an unprecedented PR operation influenced not just media coverage, but potentially the investigation itself. Before we dive deeper into this rabbit hole of conflicting evidence, hit that subscribe button to join our investigation community. We don't shy away from uncomfortable truths here at Criminal Instinct, and this case has more uncomfortable moments than most. Where were you when you first heard about Madeleine McCann's disappearance? It's one of those moments many people remember clearly, a tragedy that somehow felt personal, even to strangers thousands of miles away. Drop your answer in the comments below. Now let's return to that fateful night in Portugal, a night that began with a family vacation and ended with a mystery that remains unsolved after more than 16 years of investigation, speculation, and controversy. Praia da Luz isn't your typical tourist destination. Picture a small coastal village in southern Portugal's Algarve region, similar to a quaint beachside community in Southern California, but with whitewashed buildings, narrow cobblestone streets, and a distinctly European charm. The Ocean Club resort where the McCanns stayed wasn't a single hotel building, but rather a collection of apartments spread throughout this village, with central facilities like pools and restaurants. Apartment 5A, where the McCann family stayed, was a ground-floor 2-bedroom unit in a 5-apartment block on Rua Dr. Agostinho da Silva. For American viewers, imagine a basic vacation condo rental. Nothing luxurious, but comfortable enough for a family of 5. What made this particular apartment noteworthy was its location. It faced a street with public access on one side, while the patio doors in the rear opened to a common area with a path leading to the resort's amenities. Most crucially, the tapas restaurant where the McCanns dined that night was approximately 180 feet away, about half the length of an NFL football field, with several buildings and a swimming pool between the restaurant and their apartment. Despite claims that the apartment was visible from the restaurant, direct line of sight was impossible due to these obstacles. That evening, the McCanns had arranged to meet 7 friends, all medical professionals from the UK, at the tapas restaurant around 8:30 p.m. This arrangement had been their routine throughout the vacation. The adults would put their children to bed in their respective apartments, then gather for dinner while taking turns checking on the sleeping children. The resort did offer evening childcare at its kids' club, but the McCanns opted not to use this service. The checking system they devised was informal. Initially, they planned for someone to check each apartment every half hour. though witness statements later revealed these checks weren't precisely timed or consistently performed. The McCanns left their apartment unlocked, specifically the rear patio doors, to facilitate these checks without disturbing the children by using keys at the front door. Between 8:30 p.m. and 10 p.m., a critical sequence of events unfolded. 8:30 p.m. Kate and Jerry McCann arrive at the tapas restaurant, joining some of their friends. Others arrive shortly after. 9:05 p.m., Jerry McCann performs the first check on the children. He later reports seeing all three children, Madeleine and the twins, asleep in their beds. He uses the bathroom and returns to the restaurant by 9:10 p.m. 9:15 p.m. Jane Tanner, one of the Tapas 7, leaves the restaurant to check on her own children. While walking along Rua Dr. Agostinho da Silva, she later reports seeing a man carrying a child in pajamas walking away from the McCann apartment area. 9:30 p.m. Matthew Oldfield, another friend, checks the McCann apartment but doesn't actually enter the children's bedroom. He later states he noticed the door was more open than before, but didn't visually confirm Madeleine's presence. 10 p.m. Kate McCann goes to check on the children. Upon entering the apartment, she notices a draft and finds the children's bedroom door more open than they'd left it. She discovers Madeleine's bed empty, the window open with the shutters raised, and the curtains blowing in the wind. 10:10 p.m. The alarm is raised. Resort staff and guests begin searching the immediate area. When Kate McCann discovered Madeleine missing, Portuguese law enforcement was alerted, but their response exhibited critical errors that would haunt the investigation. The Guarda Nacional Republicana, GNR officers, arrived around 11 p.m., a full hour after the alarm was raised. No immediate roadblocks were established, allowing anyone leaving the area ample time to distance themselves from the scene. The most devastating error, however, was the failure to secure the crime scene. The apartment wasn't cordoned off until much later. During those crucial early hours, at least 20 people, including resort staff, friends, search volunteers, and eventually journalists, entered and moved freely through apartment 5A. People touched surfaces, moved items, opened and closed doors and windows, and fundamentally contaminated what should have been a pristine crime scene. This contamination had far-reaching consequences. Fingerprints collected later couldn't be reliably attributed to suspects, versus the many individuals who had legitimate reasons to be there after the alarm was raised. DNA evidence, which would later become critically important, was compromised. Even basic elements like determining the exact point of entry became impossible to establish with certainty. The mishandling of those initial hours created evidentiary gaps that no amount of subsequent investigation could overcome. In American criminal investigation terms, the chain of custody was irreparably broken before it was ever established. This fundamental failure to preserve the integrity of the crime scene would become the first of many controversies surrounding the Madeleine McCann case, and one that would make definitive answers permanently elusive. Two witness sightings stand at the center of the Madeleine McCann case, testimonies that contradict each other and create irreconcilable scenarios. These competing accounts have divided investigators, fueled speculation, and potentially obscured the truth about what happened that night. The first and most publicized sighting came from Jane Tanner, one of the Tapas 7 friends dining with the McCanns. At approximately 9:15 p.m., while returning from checking on her own children, Tanner claimed she saw a man carrying a sleeping child across Rua Dr. Agostinho da Silva, the street directly in front of the McCanns' apartment block. She described seeing a white male, between 35-40 years old, wearing beige or mustard-colored pants and a dark jacket. The man was carrying what appeared to be a sleeping child with bare feet, wearing light-colored or pinkish pajamas similar to Madeleine's. The figure was walking away from the resort, heading east toward the Praia da Luz construction site. This sighting became the foundation of the initial investigation. Police sketches based on Tanner's description circulated worldwide. The timeline seemed to fit perfectly. If Madeleine was taken shortly after Jerry McCann's 9:05 p.m. check, the abductor could feasibly have been spotted by Tanner at 9:15 p.m. For years, This man, known in case files as Tanner Man, was presumed to be the kidnapper. Then came a stunning reversal. In 2013, 6 years after Madeleine's disappearance, the Metropolitan Police's Operation Grange announced they had identified Tanner Man. During a BBC Crime Watch special, Detective Chief Inspector Andy Redwood revealed that Tanner Man was actually another British vacationer, now dubbed Crash Dad, who had been picking up his own daughter from the Ocean Club's night childcare service. This revelation raised troubling questions. How could it take 6 years to identify someone who was staying at the same resort and following a routine childcare pickup? Why hadn't Portuguese investigators canvassed other guests more thoroughly? The dismissal of this sighting created a vacuum in the timeline. If this wasn't the abductor, then when was Madeleine taken? This vacuum makes the second sighting all the more significant. At approximately 10 p.m., around the same time Kate McCann discovered Madeleine missing, 9 members of the Smith family, Irish tourists on vacation, were walking back to their accommodation after an evening out. On Rua da Escola Primaria, a narrow street leading toward the beach and about half a mile from the Ocean Club, they encountered a man carrying a sleeping child. The Smiths described a white male, 30-40 years old, average height and build, with short brown hair, wearing beige trousers. The child, wearing light-colored pajamas, appeared to be sleeping with arms hanging limply and head resting on the man's shoulder, not unlike how American parents might carry a sleeping child from a car to bed. What makes the Smith sighting explosive is what happened later. 4 months after the disappearance, family patriarch Martin Smith was watching television news coverage of the McCanns returning to the UK. Something about the way Jerry McCann was carrying one of his twins down the airplane steps triggered a shocking realization. Smith claimed with 60–80% certainty that the man they saw that night resembled Jerry McCann. This doesn't necessarily implicate Jerry McCann. The resemblance could be coincidental, the recognition mistaken, or the memory influenced by media exposure. What's undeniable, however, is that this sighting received significantly less attention than Tanner's, despite involving 9 witnesses instead of 1. These competing sightings create irreconcilable timelines. If Madeleine was taken before Jane Tanner's 9:15 p.m. sighting, how do we explain the Smith family encounter at 10:10 p.m.? If the abduction happened closer to 10 p.m., why didn't Matthew Oldfield notice Madeleine missing during his 9:30 p.m. check? And if Jerry McCann was at the tapas restaurant from 9:10 p.m. onward, as multiple witnesses confirm, how could he possibly be the man the Smiths saw at 10 p.m. nearly half a mile away? These contradictions matter because they reveal how fragile the established narrative is. The investigation seems to have cherry-picked which witness accounts to emphasize, creating a timeline that serves a particular theory while minimizing evidence that doesn't fit. What's the weather like where you're watching from? As we continue this dark story, I hope you're somewhere safe. Let me know in the comments below. I always find it fascinating how this global community connects across different time zones and climates while exploring these mysteries together. In August 2007, 3 months after Madeleine's disappearance, British authorities deployed their secret weapons to Portugal, Eddie and Keela, 2 highly specialized dogs with extraordinary abilities that would change the direction of the investigation. Eddie wasn't your typical canine. He was an enhanced victim recovery dog, EVRD, commonly known as a cadaver dog, trained to detect the scent of human decomposition, even in microscopic amounts and after considerable time had passed. His track record was impeccable, having successfully located human remains in over 200 cases across multiple countries. Eddie could detect decomposition scent through concrete, underwater, and in vehicles months after a body had been present. Keela was equally remarkable. A specialized crime scene investigation dog, she was trained to detect human blood. Not just any blood, but specifically human blood, in amounts so minute they would be invisible to the human eye. Together, these dogs represented the cutting edge of forensic detection. What happened when these canine experts entered apartment 5A sent shockwaves through the investigation. Eddie alerted to the scent of human decomposition in very specific locations: behind the sofa in the living room, in the parents' bedroom closet, on a shelf high in a bedroom closet, and on Kate McCann's clothing. Keeler independently alerted to the presence of human blood in some of the same areas, particularly behind the sofa. The dogs' reactions were documented on video, leaving little room for interpretation about their behavior. When Eddie detected decomposition scent, he would signal with a bark alert, a trained behavior that couldn't be mistaken for curiosity or random interest. These weren't vague indications. They were the clear, trained responses of animals specifically conditioned to ignore all scents except the precise ones they were trained to detect. But the most explosive development came when the dogs were brought to examine vehicles, including a Renault Scenic that the McCanns had rented 24 days after Madeleine's disappearance. Despite having no reason to suspect this particular car, Eddie immediately alerted to the trunk area. Keeler subsequently alerted to the same area. Eddie also alerted to the car key and to clothing in the McCanns' new apartment. These alerts created a troubling scenario. How could a rental car obtained more than 3 weeks after Madeleine vanished contain evidence of decomposition and blood? Forensic scientists swabbed the areas where the dogs alerted and sent the samples to the Forensic Science Service, FSS, in Birmingham, England for DNA analysis. This is where the case entered the complex world of low copy number, LCN, DNA testing. Standard DNA testing typically requires a visible sample, a blood stain, for example. LCN testing, however, can detect DNA from just a few cells, making it exponentially more sensitive. This sensitivity is both its strength and its weakness. The FSS report, authored by forensic scientist John Lowe, contained findings that have been grossly misrepresented in both directions. The DNA sample from the trunk of the rental car was a complex mixture containing genetic material from multiple people. Of Madeleine's 19 DNA markers used for identification, 15 appeared in this mixed sample. This sounds damning until you understand the limitations of the science. As Lowe explicitly stated in his report, the results are too complex for meaningful interpretation. They do not establish whether the DNA profiles attributed to Madeleine resulted from direct or secondary transfer. In layman's terms, yes, genetic material matching most of Madeleine's DNA markers was found, but it could have come from innocent contamination. The family's belongings had been transported in that car. The sample couldn't determine when or how the DNA was deposited. The sample couldn't identify which body fluid, if any, the DNA came from. The technique is so sensitive that secondary transfer, touching something that someone else touched, can deposit DNA. Dr. Lawrence Kobylinski, a forensic expert at John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York, has explained that LCN testing is problematic precisely because of its extreme sensitivity. You can get DNA from someone who's never been in the room. If I shake your hand and then I touch a pen, your DNA is on that pen. This complexity extends to the dog alerts as well. While impressive, cadaver dog alerts aren't admissible as evidence in US courts without corroborating physical evidence. Dogs can't testify, can't be cross-examined, and despite their training, false positives do occur. Some cleaning products, for instance, contain chemicals that can trigger cadaver dog alerts. What makes this forensic evidence so controversial isn't that it definitively proves anything. It's that it exists at all in a case where a child was supposedly abducted by a stranger. The official explanation struggles to account for why highly trained dogs would alert to these specific locations, yet the physical evidence recovered wasn't conclusive enough to justify charges. If you find this forensic breakdown helpful, smash that like button to help more people discover this crucial information. Understanding the science behind these tests helps cut through the sensationalism and reveals why this case remains so complex and controversial. What separates the Madeleine McCann case from virtually every other missing child investigation in history isn't just the evidence, it's the unprecedented public relations operation that shaped how the world perceived that evidence. Within 24 hours of Madeleine's disappearance, her parents weren't just dealing with Portuguese authorities. They were at the center of a global media storm. Unlike typical missing persons cases where local police control information flow, the McCanns quickly established direct lines to international media. Photos of Madeleine were distributed with remarkable speed and efficiency. Within days, her face appeared on news broadcasts from Tokyo to Toronto. This wasn't just good fortune or sympathetic journalists. By May 22, 2007, less than 3 weeks after Madeleine vanished, the British Foreign Office had dispatched Clarence Mitchell to act as the McCann's media liaison. This was extraordinary. Mitchell wasn't just any press officer. He was the director of the UK government's media monitoring unit, answering directly to the Prime Minister's office, with previous experience as a BBC correspondent. Why would the British government assign a high-ranking media official to a single missing child case in Portugal? No American family in a similar situation has ever received comparable government PR support. When Mitchell later resigned his government position to work for the McCanns full-time, his salary was paid by Brian Kennedy, a millionaire businessman who became the family's benefactor. Mitchell's involvement transformed the case narrative. As a former journalist, he understood exactly how to package information for maximum media impact. He held regular briefings, controlled access to the McCanns, and mastered the art of deflection when difficult questions arose. When Portuguese authorities made the McCanns arguidos informal suspects, Mitchell orchestrated their return to England as a sympathetic escape from persecution rather than a retreat from questioning. The true power of this PR machine became evident in its legal muscle. When British newspapers began reporting on the DNA evidence and dog alerts we just discussed, the McCanns retained Carter Ruck, one of Britain's most aggressive libel law firms. In March 2008, the Daily Express and Daily Star newspapers were forced to publish front-page apologies and pay $550,000 in damages to the fined Madeleine Fund. Later that year, the Tapas 7 received $375,000 in libel damages from the same publisher. These settlements had a chilling effect on reporting. Many outlets simply stopped covering controversial aspects of the case rather than risk expensive legal battles. This approach stands in stark contrast to how American missing children cases typically unfold. Consider the cases of John Benet Ramsey, Kaylee Anthony, or Kyron Horman. In these high-profile American cases, parents and family members faced intense media scrutiny, often brutal questioning from news outlets, and widespread speculation. They didn't have government-appointed media handlers or the resources to sue outlets that published unflattering theories. The PR strategy for the McCann case involved several sophisticated techniques, controlling the timeline. The initial abduction narrative was established so quickly and firmly that alternative explanations were immediately branded as conspiracy theories. Strategic information release. Favorable developments received press conferences. Unfavorable ones were met with no comment or dismissive statements. Emphasis on Madeleine, not the investigation. By keeping the focus on finding Madeleine rather than scrutinizing the investigation's findings, difficult questions were often sidestepped. Celebrity endorsements. From David Beckham to the Pope, high-profile supporters were regularly featured, lending credibility and sympathy. Foundation establishment. The creation of the Find Madeleine Fund provided both financial resources and an organizational platform that most missing children's families never access. Perhaps most telling was how information about the forensic evidence was managed. When Portuguese media first reported the dog alerts and DNA findings, British outlets initially covered them extensively. After the libel settlements, however, these same findings were relegated to discredited evidence status in mainstream reporting. Many Americans following the case never learned these details at all. The pattern is clear. Certain narratives were amplified while others were suppressed, not through conspiracy, but through the skillful application of public relations techniques and legal pressure. The result was a carefully curated public perception that didn't always align with the full spectrum of evidence. This disconnect between evidence and public narrative mirrors what we've seen in several controversial American cases, from the West Memphis 3 to the Stephen Avery case featured in Making a Murderer. The difference is that in those American examples, the PR advantage typically belonged to the prosecution, not the suspects. This is the kind of deep analysis mainstream media won't show you. Comment truth below if you agree we need more investigative content like this. Sonia Poulton isn't a household name in America, But in the UK, she's recognised as a journalist who has repeatedly challenged mainstream narratives. With a career spanning print journalism, television appearances and independent documentaries, Poulton positions herself as a voice for overlooked perspectives. Unlike the network journalists who covered the McCann case for major outlets, she has invested years producing independent investigations, most notably, the untold story of Madeleine McCann. What separates Poulton from other journalists is her willingness to directly confront what she views as deliberate suppression of critical evidence. Her core allegation is straightforward. Powerful interests systematically buried inconvenient aspects of the investigation to protect both the McCanns and the institutions that supported them. Poulton's most explosive claims focus on three areas of alleged evidence suppression. First, she argues that the Smith family sighting we discussed earlier was deliberately downplayed because it contradicted the preferred abduction timeline and raised uncomfortable questions about Jerry McCann's potential resemblance to the man the Smiths saw. She points out that while the Tanner sighting received immediate global attention, the Smith sighting wasn't publicly acknowledged by British police until 2013, 6 years after it occurred, and only after the Tanner sighting had been discredited. Second, Poulton highlights how the cadaver dog evidence virtually disappeared from mainstream reporting after the successful libel actions. She notes the stark contrast between how British media initially covered these findings versus their near-complete absence from subsequent documentaries and news specials. Third, she draws attention to the extraordinary government involvement, not just Clarence Mitchell's appointment, but alleged interventions by multiple British prime ministers and the expenditure of millions in taxpayer funds on Operation Grange, which some critics have characterised as more focused on clearing the McCanns than conducting a truly open investigation. The Smith sighting forms the cornerstone of Poulton's narrative. She argues that this sighting, 9 witnesses versus Tanner's single account, should have been the investigative priority from day one. The fact that EFITs based on the Smith descriptions weren't released until 2013, despite being created years earlier, suggests to her a deliberate suppression of evidence that didn't fit the preferred timeline. Is Poulton's cover-up narrative credible? Like most aspects of this case, the answer isn't black and white. There's undeniable evidence that certain aspects of the investigation received disproportionate attention while others were minimized. The unprecedented PR operation and aggressive legal strategy certainly shaped public perception in ways that benefited specific narratives. However, Poulton sometimes extends beyond available evidence when suggesting deliberate conspiracy rather than institutional bias, media self-interest, or simple incompetence. Her work raises vital questions, but occasionally fills evidential gaps with speculation that can't be definitively proven. What makes her allegations compelling isn't that they provide conclusive answers, but that they highlight the troubling patterns of information control that have characterized this case from the beginning, patterns that raise legitimate questions about whether the full truth has ever been allowed to emerge. What time is it where you're watching? This case has kept people up at night for years seeking answers. Drop the time in your location in the comments. It's fascinating to see how this mystery connects people across different time zones, with viewers often sacrificing sleep to go down the McCann rabbit hole. In June 2020, a new name exploded into the Madeleine McCann case, Christian Bruckner. German prosecutors took the extraordinary step of publicly identifying him as their prime suspect, claiming they had concrete evidence Madeleine was dead and Bruckner was responsible. This development seemed to promise resolution to a case that had remained unsolved for 13 years. Bruckner's background certainly fits the profile of someone capable of abduction. A German national with a lengthy criminal record, he lived in the Algarve region of Portugal between 1995 and 2007, including the period when Madeleine disappeared. His residence during this time was just 2 miles from the Ocean Club Resort, in a house along the rural road between Praia da Luz and Lagos. His criminal history is disturbing: convictions for child sexual abuse in Germany dating back to 1994, drug trafficking, burglary, and most significantly, the 2005 rape of a 72-year-old American woman in her home in Praia da Luz. just a short distance from where Madeleine would vanish 2 years later. For this brutal attack, Bruckner is currently serving a 7-year prison sentence in Germany. The evidence connecting him to Madeleine's case, according to German prosecutor Hans Christian Wolters, includes cell phone data placing Bruckner near the Ocean Club on the night of May 3, 2007, a recorded confession Bruckner allegedly made to an associate, witness accounts of him breaking into tourist accommodations in the area, his history of sexual crimes against children. Yet despite this seemingly compelling circumstantial case, German authorities have not filed charges related to Madeleine's disappearance. After initially claiming concrete evidence, they later clarified they lack sufficient proof to bring the case to court. The investigation's most visible action came in May 2023, when Portuguese authorities conducted extensive searches at the Arada Dam reservoir, approximately 30 miles from Praia da Luz. This location wasn't chosen randomly. Bruckner allegedly referred to it as his little paradise and visited it frequently during his time in Portugal. For 3 days, officers combed the shoreline and underwater areas, collecting soil samples and unspecified items for forensic testing. Despite initial media speculation about a breakthrough, authorities have revealed no significant findings from these searches. No human remains were reported, nor any items definitively linked to Madeleine. Why hasn't the Bruckner lead resolved the case? Several factors explain this continuing ambiguity. First, despite his criminal profile, the evidence against Bruckner appears largely circumstantial. Cell phone data can place him in the general area, but not specifically at apartment 5A. Any alleged confession to an associate becomes a matter of hearsay and credibility. Second, there's a complete absence of forensic evidence connecting Bruckner to either Madeleine or the apartment. No DNA, fibers, fingerprints, or other physical evidence has been publicly identified linking him to the crime scene. Third, the timeline creates complications. If Bruckner was the abductor, it would validate the stranger abduction theory, but questions remain about which witness sighting, if any, might have been him, and how this aligns with the checks performed by the McCanns and their friends. The Bruckner development, rather than providing closure, has added another layer to an already complex case. While his profile makes him a plausible suspect, the evidence publicly revealed thus far falls short of the standard required for prosecution, leaving the mystery of what happened to Madeleine McCann frustratingly unresolved. After 17 years of investigation, millions of dollars spent, countless headlines, and now a named suspect, the Madeleine McCann case remains defined by its contradictions. These aren't minor discrepancies. They're fundamental conflicts that prevent any single theory from fully explaining what happened that night in Portugal. The timeline doesn't add up. If Madeleine was taken before 9:15 p.m. as initially suggested, why did Matthew Oldfield not notice her missing at 9:30? If she was taken after 9:30, who was the man seen by the Smith family at 10 p.m., and how did he match Jerry McCann's appearance? If a stranger abducted her, why did cadaver dogs alert in the apartment and a car rented weeks later? If she died in the apartment, where is the conclusive forensic evidence? The crime scene contamination means we'll never have definitive answers to these questions. The early mishandling of evidence, combined with the unprecedented media and PR operation that followed, created an information environment where truth became nearly impossible to separate from narrative. This case has fundamentally changed how missing children cases are handled worldwide. In the United States, we've seen the implementation of stricter protocols for preserving crime scenes in potential abductions. The Amber Alert system has been refined based on lessons from international cases like Madeleine's, where early public notification might have made a difference. Law enforcement agencies have also recognized the double-edged sword of media involvement. While publicity can generate vital tips and awareness, it can also contaminate investigations and create pressure for premature conclusions. The McCann case demonstrated how quickly the court of public opinion can be swayed by skilled media management, rather than factual evidence. Perhaps the most troubling legacy is how this case revealed the influence of money and connections on justice. Unlike most families of missing children, The McCanns had access to government-level PR support, millionaire benefactors, and top legal representation. This created an uneven playing field where certain narratives received amplification, while others faced suppression, not through conspiracy but through the natural advantage that resources provide in shaping public discourse. What happened to Madeleine McCann? The honest answer is that we don't know with certainty. What we do know is that the full spectrum of evidence presents a more complex picture than what most casual followers of the case have been exposed to. The contradiction between what was found and what was widely reported reveals as much about media influence as it does about the case itself. Justice for Madeleine, whatever that might mean in a case with so many unknowns, requires a willingness to confront all the evidence, even when it leads to uncomfortable questions. It requires acknowledging that sometimes the most troubling aspect of a mystery isn't what we know, but what we've been discouraged from asking. If you've made it this far, you're clearly committed to understanding this case beyond the headlines. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and join us next week for another deep dive into cases where the official narrative may not tell the whole story. Where are you watching from? Our true crime community spans the globe, and I'd love to know who's with me tonight. Drop your location in the comments below. It's a powerful reminder that the search for truth connects us across continents, cultures, and time zones. Until next time, keep questioning, keep seeking, and remember that sometimes the most important evidence is hiding in plain sight.